Salve te omnes, and welcome back. Today we are going to be looking at Caesar, Book 4. This time we are beginning the AP syllabus readings for Book 4, and we are going in this video to be covering chapters 24 through 27. Alright, and that covers essentially the first part of Book 4, which is the invasion of Britain and the establishment of the Roman troops on the shore. Okay, so very briefly, a little bit of context about this particular book, and more specifically what we will be reading. Book 4, the fourth year of the war, sees Caesar making the decision to invade Britannia, the first time that has ever been attempted by a Roman army. And we will see that things don't necessarily always go very well for Caesar, which is interesting. So at this particular moment, Caesar has embarked his troops and has sailed across the English Channel and is trying to make landfall. However, the Britons, the Britanni, the Barbary, are waiting for him on the beach and will attempt to repel the Romans' landing. Okay, and so that is where we find ourselves right here. So let's go ahead and get into it, shall we? All right, so at Barbary. So we can see what's going on here. With Caesar, we see the Barbarians. All right, as ever with Caesar, we're going to try to read him from left to right without jumping around because he is very, very readable in that way. So, in medias res, at Barbary, but the Barbarians. Okay, and then we come to these ablative absolutes. Literally, with the plan of the Romans having been recognized, so the barbarians have figured out what the Roman plan is, and, right, with having sent forth their horse and chariots. Okay, so the Britons, apart from their infantry, are also bringing to the battle cavalry and chariots, and there will be a lot to say about these chariots later. With which, so we're talking here, this quo is referring kind of collectively to the equitatu et essedariis, all right, like as a type, hence genere, all right, which type, okay, we might say of troops, all right, frequently in battles they were accustomed to use. All right, so just a note, quo genere here is in the ablative case, but we see that it has been indicated as a direct object because uti, the verb right over here, is the deponent verb utor, and uti wants an ablative as its object, we remember. All right, so let's go back real quick. The Barbarians, with the plan of the Romans being recognized and having sent forth their cavalry and chariots, which type of troops, quite frequently in battles, they were accustomed to use. And then we come back to the main clause, the main thought. This is the Barbary following with the rest of their forces, so this would be their infantry, presumably. Our men from the ships as they were departing, they repelled. All right, so if we were to read that in a more English way, the Barbarians repelled our men. Egredi, this is what our men are doing, all right? Our men are disembarking from the ships. We see the e in egredi, that tells us ex navibus, so an ablative of separation. All right, so the Barbarians are beginning to repel our troops, and let's see what happens in the next sentence. Okay, this next sentence is quite long because there's a great number of things going on. So the core of the sentence itself, however, is exceedingly simple. Erat, there was, ob has causas, for these reasons. And the has here is telling us that to look forward. Okay, so Caesar is going to explain what the reasons are. He has not indicated what the reasons are yet. The has is pointing forward. For these reasons that I will describe, there was the greatest difficulty. Okay, because, quote, the ships, propter magnitudinem, on account of their size, this is the size of the ships, nisi in alto, unless in deep water, they could not stand. Okay, they could not essentially be, right? The ships could not get close to shore. Okay, so that's the first problem. So right away we see that the Romans cannot get close enough to shore. And then let's scroll down here for the next part because it goes on. Moreover, right, autem, for our soldiers. Now, this is worth noting here. We will realize why it is the case down here when we get there. But I'm just going to go ahead and tell you right now as we encounter it, militibus is dative. Okay, and the reason for the dative has to do with these three gerundives down here, this passive periphrastic construction, all right, with erat. These are datives of agent, okay, with the gerundives. So, moreover, for our soldiers, okay, three appletives, unfamiliar locations, hands that are burdened, okay, impeded, they're carrying a lot of stuff, and a great and heavy burden of arms, all right, oppressis. And oppressis is going with militibus. So, for our soldiers who were overwhelmed, we might say, by the unfamiliar locations, their hands being full, and by the large and great, you might say this is a hendiades, right, the very large burden of their weapons, all right, all appletives of means by which they are being overwhelmed, all at the same time, right, all at the same time. Notice the repetition. At the same time, from the ships, they had to jump. Remember the passive periphrastic, Carthago delenda est, Carthage must be destroyed. So our men had to jump, and in the waves they had to stand, and with the enemy they had to fight. Okay, and again, the reason this is erat pugnandum, consistendum, deciliendum is because this is being used as an impersonal, so if you wanted to translate it absolutely literally, you might say, there was the need for jumping, standing, fighting by our troops. Okay, so these are all the things that our troops need to do. They need to jump out of the ship, stand up in the waves, not drown, and fight with the enemy. Okay, so let's move right on, and let's come to the next part, which has to do with illi. Now, illi is the Barbary. Okay, and this cum is not obviously cum that means with, it's a clause, but instead of our usual when, since, or because, or although, it might be easier to understand this sort of something like while on the other hand, because what Caesar is doing is he's contrasting the hard time that our soldiers are having with the relatively easy time that the enemy are having. Okay, so on the other hand, they, the barbarians, either from the dry land or a little bit into the water, they progressed. All right, so they are walking from the dry land or just in shallow water with all of their limbs free. This word expeditis is the opposite of impeditis, which is what our soldiers were. And, we understand, in very familiar places, because this is their land. They know where they are. So what did the barbarians do with all of these advantages? They boldly cast their spears, and their horses who were insuefactos, who were used to doing this, all right, they urged them on. So having seen the advantages the enemy have, well, what does this do to our men? Well, quibus. Now, this quibus is his, all right? It's a relative, but it's actually just his. So, by these things, quibus rebus, by these things that we just talked about, all the advantages the enemy have, and all the difficulties that our men have, nostri perteriti, our men were terrified, thoroughly terrified. And of this type of fighting, completely, this omnino you might read with imperiti if you like, okay? Our men were completely unfamiliar with this type of fighting. So what do we mean by this type of fighting? Well, they're essentially a marine invasion force at this point, and that's not what the Roman soldiers signed up for. They're infantry. So, and plus then to the barbarians have chariots, which again is something Caesar will talk about later. So our men are at a great disadvantage. They're thoroughly terrified, and they're completely unused to this particular type of fighting. As a result, right, because of this, they were not, we can come down here to utebanter if we like, they were not using that same speed and zeal, okay, This is, again, it's ablative, but it's underlined as the object because utebantur wants an ablative. So they were not using the same speed and zeal which on foot, so in the infantry, in infantry battles, right, they were accustomed to use. We see a little interlocked word order here going on. So they weren't able to use that speed and eagerness that they typically use in infantry battles. And again, quo is ablative, but it's the object. Why? Because of uti, right? Because of uti. All right then, so moving on, things are going badly for our troops, but quod ubi Caesar animad vertit. And this is the thing in battle scenes, right? You wait until Caesar notices. So this quod is hoc, essentially, just like the quibus before. So this thing, the situation we were just talking about, when Caesar noticed it, okay, he does all kinds of things. Now the verb is off the screen at the moment, but it's actually usit. Okay, so Caesar gave a command, but we don't need to come there yet because we can simply experience the things that Caesar ordered to do. So the long boats. Now these would be the triremes, okay, or we would think of them perhaps as the actual warships as opposed to the cargo ships, which are the onerarias, which we will see in a moment. So the warships whose, because quarum is referring to the naves, whose appearance was very unusual to the barbarians. They were not used to seeing warships of this type, and whose movement or ability to move was very useful, expeditior, to this purpose. And the purpose is what Caesar's going to explain down below. So what did Caesar have them do? Let's scroll down a bit here so we can see the whole thing. He ordered the ships to be, these are all passive infinitives. Let's just note that very briefly. Okay, they're all passive infinitives. He ordered the ships to be moved back a little bit from the cargo ships, right? Because presumably they were protecting them. And he ordered the warships to be powered by oars, okay, because we remember that ancient ships were powered both by sail and oar. And he ordered the warships to be set up, so to go and establish themselves at the open flank of the enemy. Remember, alatus is a side, but we're in military terminology here, so we speak about a flank. So this is the side of the troops, so not face on. And from that position, right, inde, once there, with, and then these are just basically all different types of missile weapons, okay? So we could say slingshots, arrows, and then this would actually be, tormentis right here, is actually artillery. He ordered, let's come down here so we can see it, usit, let's come all the way down here. Caesar ordered the enemies be attacked and driven off. Okay, attacked and driven off by means of all of these things. And these are things, so we would say ablatives of instruments, not means. All right, this was the order that Caesar gave, and this thing, quae res, but quae again is hike, so all this we were just talking about, this thing was very much of use for our soldiers. Okay, magno usui right here is dative. Okay, nostris is also dative. Okay, but they are different. They're not going with each other directly. They're both going with fuit. This thing was for the purpose of great use in reference to our men. So this is what's called a double dative. All right, a dative of purpose, what was the point, and a dative of reference, for whom. So this thing was very helpful to our men. So that's good. All right. The next sentence, very brief. Let's see what happened. For all ablatives here, figura, motu, and genere, all ablatives. So by the appearance of the ships and by the motion of the oars and by the unusual type of artillery fire. So the barbarians presumably were not used to artillery fire coming from ships, or perhaps the type of artillery being deployed was unfamiliar to them. The Barbary Paramotor, so the barbarians were very upset by these three things that we just read through, okay? So what did they do? They stopped, konstituerunt, they stopped, and a little bit they brought their feet back. So they retreated, right? They retreated a little bit because all of these things threw them into confusion. Okay, moving on now. So, and then we get into another lengthy and convoluted sentence here, but it's highly dramatic. And nostris militibus cunctantibus. Quick note about this. I have indicated that this is to be read as an ablative absolute, all right, with our soldiers hesitating, all right, cunctor, with our soldiers hesitating. You could, however, there is an argument to be made for reading it as a dative with inquit down here, because somebody is about to say something to our men who are hesitating. Either way is fine. I don't see there's any particular reason to prefer one reading over the other. I like ablative absolutes because Caesar. So we're going to read it here as an ablative absolute. You want to read it as a dative? Be my guest. And so, because our men, our soldiers, were hesitating, primarily because of the depth of the ocean, right? Maxime is an adverb modifying this prepositional phrase. Now, this phrase right here, you'll notice, has been highlighted in red. That is because this entire clause is actually the subject of this verb inquit. Okay? This whole clause. And within the clause, qui is the subject of grebat. All right? So, this person who was carrying the eagle of the 10th legion. So instead of just calling him the aquilifer, which he is, Caesar is just being a little more descriptive. The man who was carrying the eagle for the 10th legion, all right, so the legion, the aquilifer of the 10th legion, decimae legiones. What did this man do? Well, he said something, but first he obtestatus deos. He called out to the gods to witness him. So he called upon the gods to witness. He prayed to the gods that, all right, this is his purpose in praying, that this situation turn out well for the legion. Notice the dative, all right, with eveneret. So he prayed that everything would turn out well. And then, let's come down here to what he says. Having prayed to the gods, he said, leap, soldiers. This is vocative, that's why it's not indicated as subject. Leap, imperative verb. Unless you desire this eagle to the enemy, dative, to give away. Right? So unless you want to lose this eagle to the enemy, and remember, culture note, the eagle was the standard of the legion. Losing the eagle was one of, if not the most disgraceful thing that could possibly happen to a Roman legion. So the fact that this guy is about to go and do something silly is meant to inspire the rest of the legion to do their duty. All right, and here, in fact, he lays it out. Ego certe, I for sure, I certainly, we have to come down here to praestitero, will do my duty. Okay, I at least will do my duty. And then all of this right here is a dative. I will do my duty for the state, the republic, right? And imperator. This is my general. All right, so I will do my duty for Rome and for Caesar, we might say. So here he comes. When, because don't be fooled by the voce magna, this is not cum the preposition, this is cum with this subjunctive verb over here, dixisset. All right, so this is when or after. This thing, after, in a great voice he had said, so after he had said this thing with a loud voice, himself from the ship he threw. So he threw himself from the ship. He jumped from the ship, and towards the enemy he began to carry the eagle. So he jumped off the ship and marched toward the enemy, carrying the eagle, and of course he knows the Romans have to follow him. And sure enough, they do, right? Then our men, now the first thing that we see our men doing is kohortati, right? They are encouraging each other. Okay, kohortor is a deponent verb. That's why we translated this in the active voice. All right, even though it's a perfect passive looking participle. Having encouraged each other, inter se, amongst themselves. Nay. Now this nay is a negative purpose clause. This is what they do not want to happen. All right, so that such a shame is not, you have to watch the nay, so this verb is negative, is not allowed, we might say, to happen. So once they got each other hyped up, universi, all as one, from the ship they leapt. So there you go. They're in the water now. And in fact, these men, that is to say these guys up here that just jumped off the ship, the primi, now this is a little bit of interlocked word order here in this phrase, so we see the cum delayed all the way down here. This is again another when with this subjunctive verb. So when the commanders or the leaders, okay, on the nearby ships, from the nearby ships, but we in English might say on the nearby ships, when they saw or had seen, pluperfect, these men do what they did, jump as one, having followed, this is the primi, okay, having followed, so therefore this refers to they also jumped. That's what subsecuti means in this instance. They followed in the sense that they did the same thing. And they approached the enemy. Okay, hostibus is dative here because ad propinquaverunt wants a dative with the verb. And the dictionary will tell you that. So now all of the Romans are attacking. Okay, this next sentence is very, very brief, and it redeploys one of Caesar's commonly occurring constructions, which is just this impersonal passive. Doesn't matter who was doing it. The simple fact is there was fighting. Okay, the fight was on. There was fighting on both sides. Utrisque means both of two. From both sides, acriter, adverb, something like fierce or fiercely. So there was fierce fighting now on both sides. All right. Our men, tamen. So we know right away. However, although, okay, we have a problem here. Our men, though, because, and then look at all these things that they could not do. Another tricolon of things they could not do. Maintaining their ranks, they could not do, right? Everything's with neque poterant. Standing firmly, right? They couldn't even stand up straight because they're presumably waist deep in the ocean, wearing armor. Standing firmly, they could not do. And following their standards, right? They could not do. Because they couldn't do all this, and because, we're still in the quote, because each man from each ship to whatever standards they happened to run into. Notice I said they, but alius is singular. That's why grammatically these verbs here are singular, but you can render them plural in your understanding. All right? So each man from each ship would run to whatever standards he encountered, and they all gathered there. So they're gathering around standards, but they're not forming ranks, which makes it hard. And as a result, right, and so, of course, magnopere perturbanter, our men were very greatly thrown into confusion by all of this, passive verb. Let's scroll down now and see what's up with the hostes. Oh, but the enemy, and again, notice all of the advantages. With all of the shallows being very well known, okay, they're familiar with the beach. what would they do? When they saw, this ubi is when they saw all of these objects here, aliquos singulares agredientes, is implying a nostros, our men, okay? So when they saw some of our men, one by one, singulares here implies like all alone, from the shore coming, or from the ship coming, right? So they saw somebody climbing up out of the water onto the beach, or they saw somebody jumping down from a ship all by himself. So they're targeting the single people, the people off by their own. Ablative absolute, having spurred on their horses, with their horses having been spurred on, they would come upon or attack our men, being impeded, right, being burdened. And here's why the singulares was so important up here. Many of the enemy, okay, plures hostes, would surround few of our men, right? Again, they were attacking them when they caught them out. Okay, so that's bad for our men. And while many of the enemy would surround a few of our men, the others, still the hostes, the others from the open flank, because our men are being surrounded, all as one, they would hurl their spears. Okay, so our troops are once again in a very, having gotten off the ships and made landfall, they now find themselves in an even worse situation. But fear not, because here we are again. This thing, when Caesar had noticed it. So again, this quote is hoc, referring to the situation that we just read about. When Caesar had noticed this thing, same exact construction. He gave an order. What's the order this time? The order is that the skiffs, now these are you might think of lifeboats, okay? On big ships, there will be smaller ships so that groups of people could get away perhaps, or could go do other tasks. All right, so that's what a skiff is. It's a small light boat. So Caesar ordered the skiffs of the warships and this item likewise, so we can say and the scout ships. That's what a speculor is, right? Is a scout. So speculatoria navigia are ships that go and look ahead. So scout ships, he ordered them, both of these, the skiffs and the scout ships, to be filled with soldiers. All right? So he orders these smaller boats to be filled with troops, and whomever burdened he saw. So this quos is referring to his, and it's referring to our men. So we might say something like, whenever he had seen someone, that would be quos, someone struggling. So whenever Caesar saw groups of men struggling, he sent aid to them. Dative. He sent aid to them. So once again, Caesar solves the problem. All right, and let's see the result of Caesar's work. Our men, we're back to our men, as soon as they stood on dry land, so once they've established themselves on actual dry land, little ablative absolute here, with all of their troops following, or having followed, right? So not just one or two of them or a few of them, but everybody is making it onto land now. What do? Well, they make an attack against the enemy. And this eos is the hostes, okay? This eos is the hostes. They give them to flight. So this is just the fancy Caesarian way of saying they make the enemy flee, right? They gave the enemy to flight, so they're winning. But this is almost a but. But, or and, they cannot or could not, because of perfect tense, they could not follow very far, comparative adverb, okay? They could not pursue the enemy very far. Well, why not? Because the equites, the knights, the cavalry, and then we have to come all the way down here to the verb, as usual, in Caesar, it's at the end, had not been able to, notice the pluperfect, had not been able to hold their course and literally seize the island. So we would say, like, make landfall, all right? And this is referring to the fact that Caesar has had a great amount of difficulty in crossing over from Europe to Britain. And as a result of all of this difficulty, his cavalry, the ships carrying his cavalry, had not successfully made the trip. So Caesar is mounting this invasion with infantry only, which means when the enemy breaks and runs, like they did up here, the Romans are not able to pursue simply because they get tired. All right, the Romans are wearing heavy armor and carrying shields. The barbarians are not, like most barbarians don't. Plus, they know the land. So the barbarians can run away very easily, and Caesar cannot pursue because he does not have his cavalry on hand. And so we see, as we come to the end, this one neuter singular thing compared to the previous good luck of Caesar, defuit, was lacking. Okay, this one thing was lacking. We might say for the previous good luck of Caesar. So we notice here that Caesar is explaining away the fact that his cavalry were not there at the fight, mostly because of fortune, right? It's fortune's fault. It's just luck's fault. Did Caesar have to make the landing? Well, possibly, probably, right? Difficult to know. But making the landing without cavalry was definitely bad luck for Caesar. And so there it is. Okay. All right, moving on then. What happens now with the hostes, right? They did get away, but the hostes were proilio superati. So they had been overcome. They had been defeated in the battle. As soon as, right, similatque, as soon as se recuperunt, so literally they recovered themselves from their fleeing, from their flight. So as soon as they stopped fleeing, okay, straight away, statim, straight away to Caesar, ambassadors for peace they sent. All right, so as soon as they stopped running away, they sent ambassadors to Caesar asking for peace. Notice how we've jumped down in here. There are some infinitives missing here for daturos and facturos. This daturos should be daturos esse, and facturos should also be facturos esse. These are future active infinitives. That's why they're indicated as verbs. They're not participles strictly. I mean, obviously, this is the future active participle, but the esse is missing because of this verb down here, policitisunt, rendering this whole thing as an indirect statement. Okay, so they promised. All right, what did they promise? Hostages they were going to give, they promised, and whatever Caesar ordered. Now, please note, there's no indication that Caesar is the subject here, but of course we understand that from the context. All right, so whatever things, this qua is a neuter plural accusative, that's why it's indicated as the object here. Neuter plural accusative, whatever things Caesar commanded, facturos, they, still the say, they were going to do. They promised. So, they promised that they would give hostages and then do whatever Caesar commanded. Okay, really quick, we have this brief moment here where we see this fellow named Atrebas. So, along with these ambassadors came, we might say, Comius Atrebas. Now, Atrebas featured earlier in Book 4. Caesar sent him ahead, as we'll read about here in a second. So hence the relevance of this phrase right here, right? So along with these ambassadors came Comius Atrebas, whom I talked about. This is a rare instance of the first person singular in Caesar's narrative. Whom I had mentioned up above, supra. All right. And who was this guy? Well, by Caesar into Britain, he had been sent, primissum. Okay. So he was the guy who had been sent ahead by Caesar to Britain. They brought him with. Well, let's see what's up with him. All right, so the Ili here is the barbarians, and the Hunk is Atrebas. We have to keep that in mind. So this is back in time, all right? This is previously, all right, flashback. They, as he was getting off of the ship, Hunk egresime navi, all right? Notice the perfect participle here, but it is active because egredior is deponent, so he was getting off of the ship. After he had gotten off of the ship, what did they do to him? Okay, what did they do to him? They comprehenderant him. They seized him. They apprehended him. They arrested him. Quick little cum clause in the way. Why was Atrebas coming to Britain? Why had he gotten off of the ship? Because, or when, but I like because to the Britons, this is something like in the style of an orator. So he was conveying something not written down, but he was conveying a verbal message. He was bringing the mandata Caesaris, okay, something like literally the orders of Caesar, but he was bringing the terms, Caesar's terms, to them orally, we might say. All right, so nothing was written down. So after he got out of the ship, they grabbed him, they apprehended him, and into chains they threw him. So they arrested him and jailed him as soon as he made landfall on the island. This was before the battle. And so now, right, then, that would mean coming to now, proelio facto, once the battle was over, ablative absolute, the battle that we just fought, the landing, once that was over, what did they do? Remiserant. Well, that's big of them, I suppose. They brought him back. They sent him back. And in the seeking of peace, right? Notice patenda, the gerundive, but we can just treat it, you know, like a gerund in English, right? In seeking peace, in peace which must be sought. Okay, so in seeking peace, what did the Barbary say? Well, they placed the blame. That's what these two words taken in context mean. All right, they placed the blame of this situation. That would be the arresting of him and the throwing him into chains. They placed the blame for that in multitudinem, onto the masses. Okay, so basically these legates were saying something to the effect of, it was the crowd's fault. They saw him, he was a Roman, they grabbed him and threw him into chains. It wasn't our fault. And because of this unwise decision, right, this rashness, because of this rashness, that he, this is Caesar as the subject here, that Caesar pardon them, they sought, or they asked. They asked that Caesar pardon them for this rash behavior. All right, this ut ignosceretur is technically an indirect command, if we were thinking about it grammatically, because it is what they are seeking or asking Caesar to do. All right. You could read it as a purpose clause if you like. All indirect commands are purpose clauses, roughly speaking, right? So they were seeking that Caesar pardon them for this rash decision. All right, well, let's see what Caesar does. Well, the first thing Caesar does, as we see here, is questus. This is from the deponent verb queror, so Caesar complained. Caesar complained, this quote is that. You could say because, though, it's okay. Caesar complained that, or because, when recently to the continents, now this is Europe, okay, the continent. As long as we're in Britannia, the continens, continentem, right, accusative, is going to be Europe. So recently to the continent, ambassadors were sent, right? Having sent ambassadors, ambassadors having been sent, they, the Barbary, the Britanni, they had sought peace from Caesar. So according to Caesar, recently, having sent ambassadors to the continent, the barbarians had sought peace from Caesar, but they had instead waged war without cause. So this is the substance of Caesar's complaint, that they had waged war without cause when recently they had been seeking peace. Regardless, what do we see here in this line? He will pardon their rashness, he says. Okay, this is an indirect statement right here because of Dixit. Caesar said that he would pardon their rashness. Notice imprudentiae is a dative because of ignoscere. He would overlook their rashness. Caesar said. And, okay, and Caesar commanded or, demanded hostages. All right, as you do. Concerning these hostages, this quorum is looking at the Obsides. They, the Barbary once again, some of them, so this is partem quorum, right? Some of the hostages, the Barbary statim, immediately surrendered or gave. But the other part of them, some of them needed to be gathered or were coming in, right, from further off places. So in a few days, they would give them, right, daturos is taking partem as its object, they would give over the other part of the hostages in a few days, they said. And so let's bring it to a close. In the meanwhile, they commanded their men, these are the Barbary, they commanded their men to remigrare, to go back in agros, to their fields. And the leaders, now this is the subject, okay, this is who's doing everything. The leaders, we would say, of the Britons, or of the Barbary, began to gather from all places, so these are leaders from all the various tribes all over Britain, okay? They began to gather and to, literally this would be entrust, but this is really more to devote or dedicate or, given the context, to surrender, okay, because that's what's happening here, even though this verb means to hand over. They are surrendering themselves and their tribes to Caesar. Dative because of commendare. It has dare in there. You can see it. Okay? That is what they began to do. Okay, so that is the first part of Caesar Book 4, the invasion of Britain. Caesar has managed to successfully pull it off. And when we come back, we will see what happens next, which is something not so great for Caesar and the Romans. And so there's a bit of hardship, and we will see how Caesar deals with that. All right. Maximus gratias for sticking through to the end, and I will see you all in the next one. Walete.